What's up, guys? Welcome to quiz number 9. If you're new here, this is the series where all of you guys analyze 3 positions, figure out what you think the best moves are, and then we talk about it in this video. As always, there are links in the description below if you'd like to participate in this quiz or next week's quiz. You can find both of those down there. You can also just pause the video and follow along that way. Let's get started. All right, here's the rating distribution graph. We had 656 players participate. I broke it into 3 groups. We've got 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 1,600, and 1,600 plus. Let's go look at the positions. All right, this is position number 1. If you'd like to pause the video and figure out what you would play for white and why, go ahead and do that. If you're ready to see the solution, here we go. Okay, 0 to 1,000, the top move was rook to d1, and then we had e4 and rook to b7. 1,000 to 1,600, we also had rook to d1, also e4, and then the third move was rook to b1. And then again, 1,600 plus, we had a rook to d1, e4, and also rook to b7. All right, so this position was meant to be on the easier side, and I think most people seem to understand what was going on and get the right move. So the first thing to notice is that white is in a mating net here. Okay, the pawn kind of controls the escape route here, and then the rooks cover all of these. And if white doesn't do something, black's just going to slide this rook over, and it's checkmate. And so that was what you were supposed to see, and most people did see that, which is why rook to d1 is actually the best move, and that's what most people wanted to play. It's the most obvious and logical way to just stop the checkmate, because now you can just take the rook. The other move that some people said was e4, and this is not bad because it does create an escape square for the king. So that's good. Now this is a little bit trickier because now you give black the option to put you in check quite a few times, and it almost could be a perpetual check. But actually you can run all the way over here to h3, and now you can't be put in check anymore because any of these checks, you just take it. So that was fine. Not quite as good as rook to d1, but that's totally fine. Now, real quickly, the other moves that people mentioned, so rook to b1, defending this pawn, doesn't cut it because you just get checkmated. And the same thing with rook here, okay, yes, you're attacking something, but it doesn't matter, you're getting checkmated. So I want to point out something that's, I think, kind of important in rook ending. So I used to have this false sense that, okay, I've made it through the middle game, I've traded off most of the pieces, now it's just down to a rook ending, I can kind of relax. And I think a lot of beginners and intermediate players have that feeling of like, oh, it's just a rook ending, it doesn't really matter what I play, it doesn't really matter where I put my rooks. And this example kind of shows, like, if you're not careful, you can get checkmated, even if there's only a couple of rooks, sometimes even with just one rook. If your king's in the wrong spot and there's a couple pawns and maybe your opponent's king is helping out, you can get checkmated with just a rook. So the important takeaway here is just because you're in a rook ending doesn't mean you can relax. You actually need to play very, very carefully. So just keep that in mind. Rook endings, you have to be very precise, otherwise you can very easily lose one game. And real quick, we check Stockfish. We got rook d1, e4, like we already kind of talked about. And then rook h2, yes, it stops the checkmate because you can take it, but you're also just losing your rook, so that's not really a great move. Okay, this is position number 2. If you'd like to pause the video and figure out what you would play for black, go ahead and do that. If you're ready to see the solution, here we go. Okay, so 0 to 1,000, it was really, really close. You can see it was almost exactly the same number of moves. We had queen takes h6, castles kingside, and then d5. So those were the 3 moves at 0 to 1,000. 1,000 to 1,600, we had d5, then castles, and then queen takes h6. And 1,600 plus actually had the exact same 3 moves, d5, castles, and then queen takes h6. All right, so this is a little bit of a crazy position. This is actually a game between 2 lower rated players where both players decided to kind of try to go for checkmate. And so black was kind of trying to line up here with their bishop and queen, and white was kind of doing the same thing on f7. And we end up with this really weird position. But the important thing to notice is that there's this threat on f7. And so if you just simply capture the bishop over here on h6, you give white the opportunity to take, forces your king into a very precarious position, and they can still take your bishop at the end of that. So you're not even really winning a piece. You're just kind of trading there, but you also give white the option to do that. So that's why queen takes h6 wasn't a great idea. Castling was an okay move. Castling was okay because you are defending the f7 square. Now, it's not as good as the best move, which we'll talk about in just a second, but if you had to do something, this is not bad. Now, the best move, which a lot of you did realize, was d5. And this is super important, especially for beginners. Even a lot of intermediate players don't know this. When you are playing, especially in king pawn games, okay, e4, e5 games, and the game gets pretty crazy, there's a bishop on c4, and you're trying to think of the best move. Always stop and ask yourself, what about d5? What would d5 do? And I know it for a lot of beginners, it probably looks like a weird move because it's like, well, hold on a second, I'm just giving away my pawn for free. That's exactly what you're doing. And the reason this is such a strong move a lot of times is because, number one, usually when you play d5, if the bishop's on c4, you're doing it with tempo, which means white has to react or you're going to just take their bishop. The other thing is it lets this bishop out. And in this position, it's particularly good because you're setting up to pin the queen against the king. Now, even if that wasn't there, a lot of times it's a really good idea just to let your bishop out. A couple videos ago, when I talked about c3, d5, this is one of the moves that you want to play as black. When white plays the move c3, you want to consider d5. It has a lot of benefits. Against the king's gambit, this is the move that you want to play as black, d5. Against the Danish gambit, a lot of times this is the move you want to play, d5. So the point is, in e4, e5 openings, always consider the move d5. Even if it's not a position exactly like this, it's probably pretty good. So in this case, it's just completely winning for black because now you've got this killer threat on the queen and king. So white can't just take your pawn, or if that happens, they really have to deal with that somehow, like maybe like h3 to stop this, but then you can just take the bishop. And not only have you unleashed your bishop so that you can develop it, you've also completely gotten rid of that annoying bishop on c4. So that was the move. A little bit tricky for beginners who are not used to playing it, but now that you've seen it, you'll probably notice this as an idea in a lot of your games going forward. So don't forget to think about d5. And if we check Stockfish, it lines up with what we talked about. d5 is the best because of this threat. Castling was next best, and then taking the bishop here was the third option. All right, here's position number 3. If you want to pause the video, figure out what you would play for white, go ahead and do that. If you're ready to see the solution, here we go. All right, so 0 to 1,000, we had the top move of bishop to b4. Second move was queen to e3, and the third move was g3. 1,000 to 1,600, again, top move bishop b4. Also second move queen to e3, and then the third move was knight to g1. And 1,600 plus was the exact same thing, bishop b4, queen e3, and knight to g1. All right, so first of all, not very many people suggested this move, and I think you saw the reason. If you capture that, not only is your knight just hanging, but black can actually just take the pawn with check, and then take your knight, and now you're just getting mated on g2. You can't do anything to stop it. So taking the knight was not an option. And then the question really became, what was the best way for white to kind of defend what's going on here? Because black would like to play rook to g6, threaten checkmate on g2, and it's really not easy for you to stop that. If you play g3 to block it off, then this is getting captured. You can't really move your rook to defend, or the knight just takes it. So that was the issue. So first, let me talk about bishop b4. This is actually Stockfish's second choice. So this is a very, very good idea. You're creating your own checkmate threats here. So black has to be careful if they just, go for this attack. Well, you just checkmate and win the game. So very good counter-attacking idea. The problem is, I should say the problem, the thing that black can do is just run away. So king f7, and you can try to come down here, either e7 or f8 and check them, but they're still going to be able to just run away. And actually, king g8 is better in that case. But, they get away, and you can't really mate them. You can go here, and then they run over to h7. That being said, it's not a bad move to throw in initially to create the threat, and then you needed to play knight to g1, which, if we go back to the original position, this is actually what Stockfish likes right away. And the reason knight g1 is the best move has to do with the fact that now you are threatening to take the knight. Before you weren't, because of the checkmate that we looked at, but now that's not an option anymore, so black has to deal with this. If black just takes it, you can just recapture, and you've pretty much neutralized black's attack, so that's fine. And now actually black's king is going to be in more danger after you play bishop b4. So black doesn't really want to take that. Now black can just move the knight away, maybe something like knight g5, but then you can kind of just go on the offensive, play bishop b4, you're threatening the mate here, and after something like king f7, you can even just play f4, trying to open up the rook, and your king's actually pretty safe here. And then going back, the other point of knight to g1 is that if black tries rook g6 to go for the checkmate here, well, now you can play the move g3 to block it. Before, that wasn't an option because your knight would have just gotten captured. But now your knight's safely back here on g1, so g3 is totally fine and a good way to defend. And so after something like knight takes, you can just take with the king and you're doing okay. Actually, white's better. So that was what was going on with knight to g1. It's kind of a weird move, you know, retreating your knight back to the starting square. But basically what you had to realize was this threat here with the queen and the bishop was really a problem. And this knight was a problem just sitting in front of your king. And so knight to g1 was the best way to kind of deal with both of those things. Create the threat on the knight and save your knight at the same time. Queen to e3, you know, is not a bad idea, trying to bring the queen back to help out. The problem is that now black can play rook to g8, and you can't play g3, or there's just a little sacrifice here. Knight takes, and like if you take, the queen comes in, and this is really, really bad. And so what you have to do is basically just take the knight, but then black can just takes, and this is better for black. Now it's playable for white. It's, you know, this endgame's not like immediately losing. You could play this, but when you compare this to the position that you get by keeping the queens on the board and playing knight to g1, it becomes basically, you can see how our king is eventually going to become safe, like we looked at, and now black's king gets in trouble after bishop g4. So more of an advanced position, a little bit trickier to understand exactly what was going on, but I wanted to try to throw you guys off a little bit. But I will say that if you said bishop to b4 after king f7, the move that you had to come up with then was knight to g1. So eventually you had to find this move, because, you know, if you just go for one of these checks like I talked about, it's just not that great for you. You can't really do, I mean, you can go there, but once the king gets over here, then black's totally fine. Now you're in trouble. Your queen's kind of misplaced. So you really did have to find this move eventually, either after bishop b4 or right away. So we checked Stockfish, and we can see knight g1 and bishop b4, the only two moves that really give white the advantage. All right, so for viewers versus Stockfish, in position number 1, 65.1% of everyone found the correct move, rook t1. So congratulations there. You're off to a good start. Position number 2, only 40.5% of players found the correct move, d5. A lot of players, especially under 1600, were thrown off by the queen takes h6 and castling. So not quite as good on that one. Let's see how position 3 turned out. All right, so position number 3, very, very, very few people said knight to g1 on the first move. Actually, only 4.1% found it, so we didn't beat Stockfish this time around. The average of all three positions is 36.6%. Unfortunately, that's a victory for Stockfish. This was a very difficult one to find, and bishop b4 was a close second, so I thought about including that, but I'm like, no, it wasn't the best move, so I can't count it. We'll have to do better next time, but you guys did say that you wanted these positions to be harder, so I am trying to pick more tricky and more difficult positions. If you want to get in on next week's quiz, remember, links in the description below. That one should be a fun one. As always, thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, take care.